Welcome to Smart Branding, a podcast dedicated to branding, naming, and domain names. I'm Tatiana Bonneau, and with my guests, we try to help you create and grow strong, memorable, and meaningful brands online. I believe time is one of our most precious assets, and so I want to thank you in advance if you decide to spend the next 30 minutes with us. I promise to do my best to make those worth it. Let's go. Today, I have a special guest, David Aaker. He's an author, speaker, recognized authority on branding strategy, the vice chairman of Profit, a global brand and marketing consultancy. He's also the author of, correct me if I'm wrong, David, 18 books?
That's about right, yes.
Yeah, amazing. So we're going to have a lot of fun talking about brands and branding. Thank you for joining us.
Sure, glad to be here.
Let's start with my classic question number one, a little bit of a background. Tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you end up with Profit and branding in general?
Well, I came out of college as a statistician, and I became a professor at Berkeley. And my early work was about statistical models of predicting the impact of advertising or marketing or branding on ROI would be a typical kind of article I would write, and the impact of market share on profitability and so on. But and then I got into strategy, business strategy, and then at the end of the 1980s, brand equity started to become important because people were recognizing that this emphasis on market share and emphasis on cost wasn't gaining any growth. And they were, in fact, destroying brand assets. And so they sort of came to the common sense thing that we better start building assets, and one of them is brands. And so I wrote my first branding book to define what brand equity was. And that was now 30 years ago or something. But and what I defined it is it's really consists of three things. One is relevance, which is visibility and credibility. So people think that, this is an option. And the second is image, which involves not only functional things, but also emotional things. And the third thing is engagement and sort of having loyalty and at the far side of the loyalty scale is being engaged, being part of a community. And then people said, this makes sense. How do you manage it? So I wrote my second book called Building Strong Brands on how to manage brand equity. And basically my theory was that you shouldn't hand it off to an advertising agency and ask them to develop one thought, one single word phrase or three-word phrase. It's more than that. It's 8 dimensions, 12 dimensions, and some of those are more important than others, but it's multidimensional, especially if you're in a service or B2B context. And that was one of my premises. And the other was that you don't manage by brand by a fill-in-the-box model. You don't say, this is how you develop a brand strategy. You do, what's your personality? Check. What's your attribute people like? Check. What's your social benefit? Check. What's your corporate values? Check. It's not a check out the box model. You ask yourself, what do you want your brand to stand for? And then whatever dimensions are relevant, that's what you use. So anyway, that was Building Strong Brands, and it was refined in another book called Brand Leadership. And then I wrote a book on how do you manage portfolio brands called Strategic Portfolio Strategy. And then I had so much stuff that I wrote a book called Aaker on Branding, which sort of was a digest of all those things, the 20 major points from all my books. And then I started trying to apply branding to areas which it wasn't applied before, like storytelling. I wrote a book called Creating Signature Stories, which meant you develop a story to give your message a context that people will actually attend to, they'll actually remember, and they'll actually stop counter-arguing. And then I looked at disruptive innovation, and this is a major area that everybody sort of realizes the only way to grow is to engage in some kind of disruptive innovation to create what I call must-haves for the customer that redefines what they buy. But nobody had introduced brand in that conversation. All those books, Blue Ocean and on, they don't mention branding. And so I wrote a book saying you need branding. You need it to become the exemplar. You need to position the new subcategory. You need to scale it rapidly, and you need to build barriers. And those are all branding jobs. So you have to introduce branding into disruptive innovation. And my latest book is called The Pursuit of Purpose-Driven Branding. And what that does is to go to the arena where people are now struggling to try to do social good in the context of their business. And again, this is now become accepted, widely done, but there's, again, sort of branding is underrepresented in the whole concept and the application of the concept. So my book introduced branding. It said that you need to have signature programs that are branded to tell your story about your commitment and your passion. And then you need to use those signature stories to help a business. And everybody accepts now you need to help a business with your social effort, but they think you have to make windmills or you have to enjoy energy cost savings, and then they stop. But the real payoff is to help the business brand by giving it a energy lift, by giving it an image lift, by giving it some more involvement. So that's the story of my professional life.
In a way, because it has been so rich, actually, in a way, it answers one of the other questions I had, which was how has it changed over time, branding and what you do. And in a way, you've been there over time and have reflected that change. As you just said, the latest book is on social impact, which is something
when I started 30 years ago to define brand equity, branding was not respected. What actually branding management started in the 30s with Procter & Gamble model. And Procter & Gamble, this guy at Procter & Gamble, who later became Secretary of Defense in the United States, he was a very bright guy, but when he was very young, he wrote a 3-page memo explaining why he needed to hire some people. And they said, what are these people going to do? And he wrote a memo telling what they're going to do. And that's became the P&G model. And what it said was, you look at your market, you find places where the sales are weak, and then you solve the problem by engaging in promotions or advertising or better distribution or something. So it was very tactical. And through that, through the last half century, that was the way people managed brands. And it was stuff they could hand off to an agency, delegate. And so when brand equity came in, it really fundamentally changed the way branding, marketing, and organizations worked, because for the first time, branding and marketing started to have a seat at the executive table. There was a VP of marketing or a chief marketing officer that got to be involved in strategy, and got to be involved in what kind of new products, got involved in the organizational culture, and so that really, really changed marketing, changed organizations. And of course, that's a process that didn't happen overnight, and it still has a ways to go. But the picture today is far different than it was there. They're far less likely to focus in on short-term sales. They're far less likely to delegate to an agency. In fact, that almost never done now. And they're far less likely to exclude marketing from the C-suite.
And a lot, I think, has changed as well in that with the transparency that now we have. Everybody's walking around with their phone, and, any information you can just publish, share, goes around the world in minutes. and the importance of a brand, like you can't have the company is no longer that closed box that, you know, something can happen behind the walls and then we sell something else as a story. It's even your employees, effectively, you have to market yourself as much to them as you do to your audience.
Yes, and that's you certainly learn that when you get into what kind of a social effort do you want to have and how do you want to communicate that? Because a primary driver is employees. Employees don't want to work for companies that just want to make profits. They don't want to eat. They don't even want to work for companies that want to make insanely great products, like Steve Jobs famously said. They want companies that are interested in doing social good, either directly or indirectly. And so when you develop a social program and you tie it to your business, the employee insistence is one main reason. Now, there's also some customers also value that, some investors value that, but primarily it's employees.
I want to go a step back since you mentioned you have a background in statistics, which is quite interesting, and you started working on measuring the impact of a brand on return on investment, and that is something that it really is close to me because I deal with premium domain names as brand assets, and one of the questions I very, very oftentimes get, and the problems that people have when they consider whether it's worth investing X amount in the right domain name for the business, is how do I measure that impact? You know, how like a strong brand, how do I measure that? How do I quantify that? How do I put a number on it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, in statistical analysis, it's really important to be careful of doing cross-sectional analysis. That means comparing one company versus another. It's much better to use time series analysis to look at changes in brands and see what that change for a given company has to do with things like profitability. And we did that, and what we found was that if you change brand equity, the impact on stock return is nearly as great as if you improve accounting profitability, and which everybody knows is a prime mover for better or for worse for stock return. So brands make a difference. You can say that on the average, but there's that really is not helpful if you're business A, because first of all, you're not a company, and second of all, what does that say about you? So for a specific business, one thing you can do is look at role models, look at stories of people that have done something to their brand and seen an enormous jump in their business. And in my book on storytelling and in my book on subcategories, I have a lot of examples of that. So you can point to an example. Probably you can find one in your business that has either destroyed their business or really exploded their business because of something they did to their brand. And it's pretty clear that was the answer. And then, but the real thing you got to do is you look at your business strategy, really enunciate your business strategy, and then ask the question, what kind of brand assets do I have to make that a success? That's really the key question. And because when you look at business success, there's always six, 7, or 8 things that are indispensable to that success. If you withdraw any one of them, it will fail. So it's pretty hard to say that any one of them, whether it's the people, your factories, your brand, your distribution, it's hard to say any one of them is got this X rate of return. Because on one hand, if you remove them, they got nothing, so they have a huge rate of return. But on the other hand, if you have that alone and not the other things, you're not going to have much. So anyway, but that's the thought process. And so in the first 2 chapters of my book, Aaker on Branding, I summarize all this. I summarize some data and the ways you can go about showing the financial value of a brand. So you might look at those two chapters.
Definitely. I'm like, I was going to make a note of which books. I was just all
this is what the book looks like. Aaker on branding.
Great. Where can one find those?
Well, I don't know the distribution in France, and I don't even know if. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay,
don't you have Amazon or something like that?
Yeah, we do. I'll check and we'll include those in the links when we publish, so people can just reach that. On that, actually, I noticed you have your own name as a domain name. You also are part of you're the vice chairman of Profit, which has profit.com. So I'm very curious about what are your thoughts on domain names?
I blog. I've blogged 370 times in the last, 6 years. And you can find those blogs on either davidaaker.com or on profit.com. And so every week or so, I put out a piece, usually 500, 800 words, exploring some topic or some case study or something that's caught my eye as really a good brand practice or a problem that is related to branding.
Mm. And what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence? And specifically, you said you blog every week or every episode often. So what are your thoughts on how artificial intelligence is now already affecting storytelling and generally brands, how they use it? How do you see that developing?
I'm not the right person to ask about artificial intelligence. I think that one obvious use of it is to improve the use of artificial intelligence to engage in conversations, maybe in a service context or an ordering context. And so that can definitely improve that. And that's for sure. And artificial intelligence can help you develop products and so forth as well. But I am kind of a skeptic of the digital world in several respects. One, when Meta changed its name from Facebook to Meta, I wrote a blog that said that was a dumb thing to do. It got over 100,000 views. It's the biggest audience I've ever gotten for a blog. Most of my blog posts get around 5 to 10,000, but this got 100,000. And what I said was that the metaverse may not be as great as you think. And you can have a metaverse program, but let's not have and let me give you two stories. I'm a big believer of stories. Let's see. One story is about an ad or an article, famous article that was written in the Harvard Business Review in 1970. And in that article, they said that there's going to be no more checkbooks. Checkbooks are dead because now we have the technology to replace checks. And who would write checks? And so everybody was anybody that made checkbooks, their stock collapsed, and everybody thought maybe in a couple of years nobody's going to be writing checks. Check writing increased every year for 30 straight years after. And 10 years after that, it plateaued for 10 years, and then it started a modest decline. So here we are, 55 years later, people are still writing checks. I'll give you another data point. In the 1980s, a scanner data came in. On your box at the grocery store, you have a little symbol. They scan it. So now in the 1980s, people they went into little small towns and they got all the data off every store and they got the data off every TV set, what they were watching. Okay. So now finally you could scientifically manage marketing and people were so happy. And they did these enormous experiments. Some lasted 2 years. And they'd go into one home and show 0 ads for a product. Another home, they'd show 1. Another home, they'd show 2. Another home, they'd show 8. And they could finally see what the value of ad expenditures were scientifically. They were so happy. Because they finally, the one part of business they couldn't manage scientifically, now they could. So they did all these experiments, and you know what they discovered? That the way to improve sales was to give cents off promotion, price promotions. That improved sales, and nothing else did. So what happened was they taught the consumers 2 things. They taught consumers that only price mattered, and they taught them to if you want to buy one, wait till the next sale. It's just around the corner. It'll be in 2 weeks, 1 week, whatever. Don't buy it at full price. They destroyed brands.
Yeah.
They actually destroyed brands, and they destroyed profits. And so it took 2 or 3 years to have some of these brands recover from this terrible, terrible thing. So I worry about today with big data and so forth that we're going to do the same thing. We're going to focus on this week's sales, and we're going to find out that brand destructive things will really improve next week's sales, and we're going to destroy assets again. So anyway, I'm a little skeptical about, a lot of things in the metaverse. I don't know about AI, but that's probably more, powerful than others. Certainly e-commerce has been prosperous. Certainly digitalized communication with social media, that's been changing the world, and maybe AI will too.
On that, you just gave an example of how things can go wrong when people are trying to, get them right. What, in your experience, are some main things that you would say entrepreneurs oftentimes get when it comes to branding?
Well, I'm like you. As I got into digital innovation, and a lot of digital innovation doesn't come from big companies; it comes from startups. And you can speak to this more than I can, but isn't it true that startups are so preoccupied with their big idea? They're they're putting money into that, and how you bring that to market, how you get a beta test, and so on. And then they need accounting, and they need selling, and it's not as if they don't want to do branding or they don't understand it, but it is true they don't understand it. Usually they have no staff. They don't even access the staff. They often don't have money to pay for access to staff that does branding. And so they don't do branding, or they, about naming. They probably use the name they've been using, this is product A. And you say, well, the name A isn't very grabbing, but you must have stories that don't quit. And so it's a real challenge for a startup to understand at the very outset that you need a brand. Now, every once in a while, you have a startup entrepreneur that's sort of gifted with branding talent and insight, and then he's in a good place. But most do not.
I totally agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. And in a way, many. Sadly, most actually stories, and I have the experience from, let's say, the past 5 coming up to probably 6 years now, with where I deal with naming and domains. Before that, I had a digital agency where we were developing websites and software, so it was still in that space, working with entrepreneurs on their digital presence. It's done backwards. It's literally like people go, I just have that wonderful idea. I just need to get it out. Let's get the website. Let's do this. Let's do that. And we'll think about the branding. Actually, it's not even put in words. It's not even like we'll think about the branding later. It's like done later as it starts hitting them on the head. And they're like, there's something wrong here. And that's where they start looking at.
There's another problem, and it gets into naming too. and that is to project your business strategy. Because when you start, you understand, you've got a product offering, you got a market, and it's imperative you win. Otherwise, you don't have nothing. But it's important to look ahead and see what do you want to do in the future, ongoing. And it might be that there was a lot of people that thought it was really dumb to call Amazon. They should have called it books.com. If they had called it books.com, they would have had a lot better chance of winning at the outset. But they didn't call it books.com. They called it Amazon because they knew from the outset that they wanted to be more than books. And so Amazon is just a wonderful name for what that company evolved into. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's something actually I do say to people when we talk about names. It doesn't matter. Like, obviously, you're starting out, you're testing something, you don't even know if it will work, but you have to always think ahead and shape that, starting with the name and the domain name and the brand and what it stands for and all of that, with that big vision in mind. Otherwise, you're putting yourself in that box and it's going to be a real struggle, if at all possible, to get out of it.
Yeah, of course, there's a lot of things. It's not just the brand name that does it. There's all of course. That's only a small percentage of it. So if you have Salesforce.com, which they started off as a company that was going to help people's Salesforce be more efficient. Well, now they've moved far beyond helping Salesforce, but they've been able to make that name stand for more than helping Salesforces. And so it's not impossible to do it, but it's harder.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Salesforce because Mark Benioff himself, he's very known in domain space because he has quite a big portfolio of very good names. So like they have Force.com, Einstein.com. Just off the top of my head, there's some other names, but yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing that you get into branding. There's something you have a portfolio of brands. And as I mentioned, I wrote a book called Strategic Portfolio Management or something. And anyway, that's a good example. So it's not just the company name you have to worry about. You have to worry about your whole system of names. And it's a temptation for high-tech startups is to have sort of naming promiscuity. You have too many names. And you end up confusing everybody. And one of the things that our company does have to come in and clean up the portfolio because it gets so confusing that even people inside the company don't understand what a customer should take off the branding shelf. So, and then you have a new product, and you sometimes get so paralyzed, which brand to use to put on that product, and so you just get flustered. So multiple brands are really powerful, but they have to be managed as a family, as a group.
I'm glad you actually touched on your company. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like, who can reach out to you personally and profit as a company, and for what services, what do you offer?
Well, we started off as a branding company, and then we did things like design and consumer insights and websites and so on. But now we are in a much broader space. We help people with digital transformation, changing their organization. So not only the brand, but the culture and the people and the strategy. And so anyway, we help with business strategy, and but either brand is the sort of our one of our perspectives, or it's something that we are able to build into the whole process. So, but we have offices in Munich, in Berlin, in Zurich, and in London.
Oh,
And in the Far East, we got one in Dubai too.
wonderful. What's the story behind the name? Why Profit?
Well, Profit started in 1890 as a market research company, and that's a really good example. And Profit was kind of a cute name for a market research company because you kind of get insight and you can see ahead. You're kind of like a prophet. And then we got into branding. Well, then it turns out nobody paid for market research, but they did pay for insights. So we sort of morphed into a branding company, and I joined it about 10 years later. But it became a branding company, and then the name didn't really work. And of course, lately when we're doing business in the Far East, Near East, it really doesn't work. But so we said, we got to change the name. And then the then owner said, we can't change the name. We own the URL, profit.com. So we can't change the name because we'd never be able to get another good URL. They're all taken. Consulting.com is plain, brand.com, it's all taken. So we have to stick with profit.com. And so you can't, I have to spell it for everybody. And if there's any associations, they're all bad. So it's a really good example of how you should be careful of your name at the outset.
It's funny because you have that, we can change the name because we have the URL. I usually deal with people who have the other problem where like they would be called, examplemarketing.com, and they want to get example.com, and you actually have the right URL, but you have another problem. That's quite unique.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And people ask you for naming, they ask me for branding, but it's always a bigger challenge than that. You really have to get involved in their business strategy and their corporate values and what they want to stand for. And it's more than just names. It's more than just a brand.
No, I think I like the way you described it earlier. You had that question of like, what are the key aspects of like how I see success, and those are very individual for one thing, because every business has their own goals and their own mission, and all of that it cannot be the same for two businesses, let alone thousands and hundreds. So based on that list of key elements would be different, and then they within themselves those elements work together as well. You can take one and say, oh, that's the one that does it all. So yeah, let's wrap it up. I think you had your latest book. What are you up to this year? What are you doing? That's
I'm spending all my time working with nonprofits and companies to try to. This is what the book looks like. It's the future of purpose-driven branding, and I am just really astounded by the fact that branding is so important to do this right. You need. I mean, people think they've done their job when they have a bunch of grants they give out, a volunteer program for their employees. They have some energy goals, and maybe they fill out an ESG report, which is usually worthless. And and at the end of the day, they look like everybody else. They look like they're just engaged in tokenism or not serious, and they need to communicate it, and just to be successful as a program. And so they need signature programs, like Dove Real Beauty Program, or Lifebuoy's Help a Child Reach 5 program, or Hellman's Make Taste Not Waste program for us. And they need a branded program. because without a brand, it's really hard to communicate who you are, what you do, or why you do it. And so they need a brand, but they also need a brand to perform another job, which is to help the business. To help the business by elevating the business brand, by giving it more energy, by giving it more stakeholder involvement. And if you look at their brand and you ask yourself, how can the signature brand help that brand? And then you embed it in the business strategy to make that happen. And then you find out that, well, if you're helping the business, it's going to really be motivated to give you more resources, and your social program is going to take off. And so on. And so these successful social programs have been in existence for 10, 20, 30 years. We're not talking about some sort of fall promotion here. We're talking about a real commitment and a real in-depth understanding of the problem you're dealing with, whether it's food waste or kids dying under 12 or women's self-esteem. And so branding is really important. So I talk on here the link between business strategy and the social programs, and that link is branding. The brand is social programs and the business brand. And so I talk about signature programs that impact and inspire, and how important that is to really have an effective program.
Great. Well, that's been absolutely wonderful and very insightful, and I think very timely as well. I've been talking to a lot of my guests, and I almost don't really have an interview there where we don't mention in some way or another how demanding customers are nowadays. We as consumers, how demanding we are, and definitely that social aspect of any business. I just can't see new or established brands surviving without it. So thank you. That's been a pleasure. Thanks. And we'll include all the links that you mentioned in the write-up for the podcast so that our guests can reach them. Thanks. It's been
okay. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us in this episode of Smart Branding Podcast. Feel free to visit smartbranding.com for more information and reach out if you have any suggestions, questions, ideas, or just want to learn more about how a good domain name strategy can help you build a strong and successful brand. See you next time.